Hello everyone, Mikey there, Panzernator here, and today we are going to talk about the 25th Dev Diary for Hearts of Iron 4, Man the Guns, and the Ironclad 1.6 update. And this one's all about fuel review, and motorized artillery. So this one, our author is Archangel, and well, this is also the first Dev Diary of 2019. Of course, art and numbers not being final, usual disclaimers apply, but let's just jump into it. So when the game first started, well, the current version of the game, when it was released, basically you needed oil to produce units that would consume oil, but of course they're adding a fuel system now, so you can build tanks and they only consume fuel whenever they run, stuff like that. And the main reason they start off with that abstraction they're still using a very simplified version of what happens in the real world, is because refining oil into various fuels is very, very confusing. Trust me, as someone who has a degree in chemical engineering, making fuel and refineries are very complicated, very interesting. I kind of understand how they work. I got a degree, so I clearly understand it well enough. It's very confusing. So having it just simplified from oil straight to fuel is probably going to be all right. So fuel is going to be a resource at the top bar. And the UI kind of shows a couple things. The number shows you how long until your full fuel supply is either fully filled up or until it's fully depleted. The number is green in this picture, which indicates that the stockpile is filling up. And the number will become red if it is going down. The green bar at the bottom, that's kind of green, kind of red, shows the state of the stockpile. You can kind of see this one's a little over half full. And the arrows next to the oil drum, the green arrows pointing up, show that the stockpile is growing. And I assume they'd be red arrows going down if it was being depleted. So when it comes to trade, oil is still traded as it was previously, but it's not used in unit production. So instead of that, excess oil is converted to fuel at an hourly rate. So the UI used to say production at the bottom, but now it says needed. And oil is separated into two different numbers, active need and potential need, designated by A and P, respectively. So active need basically shows you how much fuel you're using right now, and potential need is how much oil you would take to run all of your units that you need oil full time. So in the screenshot, you have 150 units of oil for use. You're actively using 118, but to use all of your units, the potential use would be 506. So that is that. Also, refineries have been changed. Instead of refineries giving oil, they give hourly fuel, which makes more sense historically, and it's easier to control how much of the fuel resource is produced by refineries. On the historical note, this is true because the Germans, the whole process, the whole synthetic refinery concept in the game comes from the Germans, what they would do. And I'm very familiar with this because I did an internship with a similar facility, but using biomass instead of coal. I'm putting the cart before the horse here. The Germans, they would take coal, and they'd run it through a bunch of reactions and create syngas, SYN gas. And that would be hydrogen, so H2 molecules, and carbon monoxide, CO molecules. And with those two, you can run a bunch of chemical reactions and make any chemical compound in the world, any hydrocarbon you can. And the Germans ran the syngas through the Fischer-Tropsch process, and that would create diesel fuel. And so the Germans were able to, in a very roundabout, energy-intensive, and expensive process that was in a bunch of refineries that said, hey, B-17s, drop bombs here. Those facilities. But yeah, the Germans were able to create diesel fuel from coal. Wasn't ideal. It kind of sucked, and that's why, well, in the 20 teens, I was doing research on how to do this, but with like wood pellets instead. Anyways, that's a tangent. But long story short, instead of the synthetic refiners did not make crude oil, they made fuel, or you could make it into specific compounds. So yeah, this change reflects history. That's a tangent, but I have to put in my 2 cents here, of course. Otherwise, you could just read the dev diaries yourself, which, if you want to do, the link is in the description. Blah, blah, blah. So previously, tech increases could only allow for a minimum increase in a single unit of oil. But now that the refineries directly generate fuel, this gives modders much more control over the output of synthetic refineries. And so they added something for countries that don't have enough fuel production during wartime to meet their needs. You can develop a stockpile. So most nations don't start with a large stockpile capacity, and your stockpile potential will be reduced by economy laws. So, changing those early is going to be a priority, as always, but it's going to have more benefits. And you can increase your stockpile capacity, but it requires some investment and takes space away from industry throughout the producing silo facilities. So I think what this means, it doesn't say it explicitly, but your silos are going to take the same slots that, your civilians, your dockyards, military factories, rocket sites, and nuclear reactors take up. So it's going to take up, kind of the same building slot system. And of course, one of the nations that might want to increase their stockpile capacity is Japan, because, well, once the U.S. Cuts off their resources and they want to fight the U.S. in the Pacific, they're going to need a decent fuel reserve to run their navies. And this takes us to fuel prioritization. So to help understand what's going on in fuel stockpiles, and you can directly manage where your fuel goes whenever you're running low. This fuel prioritization is added to a special section of the logistics tab. So this tells you pretty much a breakdown of how each military branch and different industries are using your oil. Well, I guess the dockyards and the factories are their own thing, but you can basically set priorities to where you want your fuel to go if there is a shortage. So say you're Germany and you want first priority to be the army and your panzers for fighting the Soviets, second priority the Luftwaffe, and your third priority can be the Navy. That's just a historical example that I thought of. Or if you're like the British and you got to keep the RAF and the Royal Navy going, but the Army, to hell with them. You're just sitting in London hoping the Germans don't invade anyway. You can, set it up the opposite way. So basically this will give you more control, kind of like how in the deployment screen you can control where the new equipment is going and all of that. So there's a special variant of the stockpile menu which is used for other equipment. Breaks down. Okay, so blah, 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 blah. So you'll also, just like how there in the logistics screen is or graphs or stockpiles of infantry equipment, you will have the same thing for fuel, so you can see your fuel usage and stockpile and all of that. In addition, the logistics support company has also been changed, and logistics companies reduce your fuel usage. Logistics Company 3, it appears here that it reduces your fuel usage in addition to your supply usage. So, practical note, put these in every motorized division in your army because, it's going to be useful. You're trading support equipment for support equipment and motorized, I think, for us fuel. So that's the kind of fuel overview, and now we get to the second part, which is motorized artillery units. So when Hearts of Iron was first released, and with the way production worked, having a motorized artillery unit would have been overpowered, because it would basically be like you're trading a few extra trucks in your supply needs for a better unit all across the board. But now that there's fuel, there's a drawback, because if all of your artillery units are motorized, well, then they all burn gasoline, and you have to keep them all supplied. So if you want to, if you want your motorized divisions to basically be your standard 7.2 infantry but faster, you can now do that now without having to spend a lot of resources on self-propelled artillery. And of course, they're making this for all the different artillery variants. So anti-tank, anti-air artillery, and rocket artillery. So yes, so here we pretty much these units, they have the exact same firepower as the standard infantry divisions, but each battalion requires 50 trucks each and consumes 50% more supplies, and of course requires fuel to run. So here we see a division design that is what I talked about, a 7.2. So previously, if you wanted a fast division with artillery support, but you didn't have self-propelled artillery, what you'd have to do is you'd have to settle on just the support companies. But now you can have line motorized artillery and of all the variants. So this should be pretty neat. No special tech is required for motorized artillery, but if you just have motorized equipment and the respective artillery type research, unlocks these battalions. And that is all for today. Unfortunately, our fearless host Archangel did not give us any rejected titles. It's a little concerning, but anyways, kind of a simpler dev diary, kind of to dip our toes in. I don't know if this is just wrapping up the last couple things. I'm just waiting for that release date, just like all of you are. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to, I'm definitely going to use the new motorized battalions, because self-propelled artillery is good and all, but it's expensive. Just having your trucks tow, if your trucks tow all of your artillery types, that will be very useful. And also, I think in terms of fuel, the change to the refineries, their synthetic refineries, makes a lot of sense. And the prioritization, well, I came up with 2 examples of role-playing stuff right there. So anyways, that is it for this dev diary. I hope you enjoyed this overview. If you did, be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one. And until then, this is Mikey Panzernator signing out. See ya, nerds!